For my capstone project, I selected Scotland as my focus country. I chose Scotland because it's where a lot of my family is from, and I was interested in learning more about the cuisine. I also fell in love with the landscape when I got to visit. The country is divided into three general areas: the Highlands, the Lowlands, which contain more of the bigger cities such as Glasgow and Edinburgh, and then the islands. These are the major islands, but Scotland actually has over 900 islands. To represent more of the landscape, I decided to focus my capstone menu on the local ingredients, everything that you can forage or gather or hunt in Scotland. Scotland was inhabited in the Stone Age, so this is like traditionally what Scottish people would have eaten, as well as some of the traditional Scottish dishes that don't necessarily always include the local ingredients, such as marmalade. So Scottish cuisine has been shaped and influenced by multiple groups throughout history. There's a strong Nordic influence in Scotland because of the Vikings. An example of that is the national dish of Scotland, haggis, that was actually thought to have been brought by the Vikings in the 9th or 10th century. The word haggis actually comes from a Nordic word, which means minced meat. And there are many Scottish words that actually do have that influence. The Vikings also brought with them the method of smoking meat, which was not present in Scotland prior to that. The Celts and the Picts also were two groups that had major influence on Scottish cuisine. And actually during the 1700s, Scotland and France had a strong alliance, and that brought a lot of French chefs and noblemen to Scottish court, which brought the influence of food as well, including rich sauces. So some of the traditional Scottish dishes include a lot of breads with spiced meat fillings, as well as oat, a lot of fresh fruit, especially berries. Haggis, I think, is a very well-known one. So for my display, I want to focus on the Scottish clans. So the clan system was something in Scotland that was larger family groups that were represented by a tartan, which is a plaid, as well as a motto, a coat of arms, and the land that they occupied. So I want to include that in my display, as well as some of the wildlife and the nature, including the thistles, which is Scotland's national flower. I would also like to include some of the natural colors of the landscape and some pottery pieces. So more greens and blues, some purples and some browns. The primary ingredients that I will be using be treacle, which is blackstrap molasses, heather honey. So the honey in Scotland, the bees actually forage over the large fields of heather, which has quite an influence on the flavor of the honey. Oats and barley are also very popular in Scotland. That is what was able to grow, especially in the Northern Islands. Ginger is a very popular ingredient as well. Whiskey, Scotland is known to be a very large producer of whiskey. And then they have some other crops like rhubarb and turnips, potatoes. They also, in more modern days, have started to become very large producers of gin. They produce most of the United Kingdom's gin. Berries are a very popular foraging ingredient as well. Brambles, which are blackberries, as well as raspberries, black and red currants. I'm also looking to use some type of game, depending on what is available, either venison or hare. And then some of the herbs that you would be able to forage, such as juniper, wood sorrel, the bog myrtle, nettle, or meadowsweet. So that would also be based on what I would be able to have available, or something that would be a similar influenced by flavor. So for my chocolates, I'm looking to do something that would be inspired by the Scottish tablet, which is similar to fudge, but it has a lighter, more crystallized texture. So generally it's just served on its own, but I would like to layer it on top of a thin layer of shortbread, as well with a jelly or jam layer for more of a texture variation. And then obviously enrobed in the chocolate and with a tempered chocolate decoration of a thistle. And I would like to add some purple coloring to that thistle just for authenticity and to add a visual interest. I would also like to add a molded chocolate. So for my molded chocolate, I would love to do a Scots pine ganache, depending on if I can have access to Scots pine. If not, I would like to look at juniper or meadowsweet. And then I want to try and experiment with some molecular gastronomy to do the spherification using either whiskey or gin, and possibly using blackberry for a jelly layer if the molecular gastronomy does not pan out. For my entremet, this was inspired by the traditional dessert known as the clootie dumpling. So I took the flavors of this dessert and kind of like reworked them into the format of an entremet. So I'm going to do a treacle mousse with the sultanas in the mousse, a red currant or a bramble jelly layer, and then the cake is going to be ginger and cinnamon. I'm going to have a crispy base, which is hazelnut and oats, and then a whiskey syrup. For the design of my entremet, I'm looking at doing something that would represent the Scottish flag. So using royal blue as well as a white chocolate decoration to create that representation, and hopefully some fresh fruit in the like the dark blue colors. For my bread, my preserve, and my cheese, I'm looking at doing a marmalade. That is something that is more traditional, but not a local ingredient. The oranges were brought from Spain, but it is thought to have been invented in Scotland. Only England disputes that. But adding more of a more unique flavor, such as something savory that you would find locally in Scotland as well. For my bread, I would like to do a sourdough bread, especially because with the sourdough starter and the influence that the flour from the area has on the flavor, just going back to that local product, and then flavoring it with the Scottish herbs, and using barley, because that is what was able to be grown, as I mentioned before. And then doing a score pattern representative of the flavors and more of a like a greenery look. For the cheese, I would like to use, I believe there will be a soft cow cheese or goat cheese. Traditionally in Scotland, they have the crowdie, which would have been like the leftover milk that they made into cheese, and then they roll it in like an oat and a spice mix. And then for my petit four, this is inspired by the traditional Scottish dessert known as cranachan. So the flavors of that dish are cream, honey, whiskey, raspberry, and oat. So I would like to do an honey oat cake with a whiskey syrup, and then a raspberry mousse or raspberry crème. As decoration, I would like to use fresh raspberries and hopefully heather flowers for the heather honey, and then do a chocolate disc as well. I would like to do a round design for that, as well as a transparent glaze. I want the layers to be seen, as that is traditionally how a cranachan was served, so you could see the layers. For my laminated pastry, this is inspired by a forfar britty or a Scotch pie, as it's also known. This would also be inspired by the Highlands, so like hunting game and foraging. But I'd like to update it to like a puff pastry, and then with a more modern design. This would be flavored with more of a game and vegetable medley, so hare or venison, depending on what is available. Onions, turnip, wild thyme, some hedgehog mushrooms or something similar to that, and that's what you would find in the Highlands, and then horseradish. And then I want to do a thinly sliced potato decoration. And then for my tart, I'm hoping to do a savory tart inspired by the Scottish Islands. So this would be smoked salmon paired with gin and juniper with a creme fraiche and a blackberry component as well, or red currant. And then maybe incorporating kale and beetroot and possibly some hazelnuts to create those different layers. Or if I were to do a sweet tart, then I would be looking more to do some rhubarb and apple and hazelnut flavors. And that is my presentation. Thank you for listening.